Once again at Nomad PDU. Today is a general discussion about the importance of the instructions that are in the Nomad PDU. And if there's only one tutorial you watch, it should be this one. And the reason I want to point the importance of instructions out is that we still get questions from customers that are specifically covered in the instructions continually, which, given thousands and thousands of units out there, it ties up a lot of our time answering questions that are simply in here, and that concerns us that you're not reading instructions. Why? First question will be is, how do I set the Nomad up to jumpstart the vehicle? The number one point in the instructions is do not jumpstart from the Nomad. It's not designed to do that. The composition or the chemical or chemistry is not designed to jumpstart a vehicle. So let's make that very, very clear. If you want to jumpstart a vehicle, there are specific products to do that. They're called jump packs. Now, even those jump packs that are specifically designed to jumpstart your vehicle, you must read the instructions, because it'll tell you to crank it no more than, say, 8 or 10 times, rest it for 30 seconds or a minute, and then do another 10 cranks. Most people will crank it 20, 30 times, rest it until the pack's dead, and then try to charge it super fast, double the charge if they can, and try to charge the jump pack up if that's possible from the solar or etc. That's going to cause an issue, and it's also going to cause a chemistry breakdown in that power pack, and eventually it becomes volatile, it starts to swell up, and then unfortunately they sometimes ignite. Now, that is not the battery pack's fault. The instructions say very clearly with warnings, do not do this. Okay, it's a little bit like using common sense. Okay, common sense is sometimes not so common. With any battery of any sort, any charger that you buy in the market for AGM, lead acid, gel, doesn't matter, on the actual battery charger it says never charge batteries unsupervised or unattended. It's just common sense not to do that. And the reason we say that is we don't know what sort of power is coming out of a house, for example, or possibly there's a power spike. And the other thing is we don't know what's between, say, the house or 240 going out to a charge to a battery, so like your car battery. There's no difference between that and, say, the Nomad. The reason that I point that out is, again, the importance of instructions. If you follow the instructions, then you're never going to have a problem with the unit. So I've got a few things here today, and we want to talk about charging the unit. And when we talk about the jump pack, reading instructions is very, very important. And anything else you have accessory-wise is understanding limitations and draw. Fridges are the next common question we'll get, and the most common issue, or I guess challenge, is that people don't understand the fridge. And the fridge will draw a certain amount of current or amperage for a certain amount of time, and when the thermostat kicks in because it's reached a temperature, it doesn't draw anything. We get a phone call saying the power pack's not working. You've got to remember that this is simply a power pack. It's a dumb device, if you want to call it that. It just simply provides power. The fridge will draw and work perfectly between a certain voltage range, and it's typically maybe 10.5 through to, say, 12.6 or higher, 12.24. And once the unit gets unit gets down to 11.5 volt, that fridge will stop working. It's not the power pack, it's actually the fridge, the way the voltage range works. We have seen in the past you can use an inverter, plug it into the Nomad, and then you can run that on its 240 because it thinks it's 240. The reason that I've spoken about that and then talked about the inverter is specifically for this. Inverters are not an unlimited power supply because it has a 240. Very common question we'll get is from people that have forward drives that have inverters in the vehicle. And it's good that you send an email through to us and ask the question before you start plugging things into it. They are typically very, very small. This is a 150 watt inverter. In the vehicles, they're typically 150 or even less. You might get a 200 watt. And then what somebody will do is, I think, well, I'll upgrade the inverter in the vehicle without upgrading the wiring. So the wiring in the vehicle is going to be very, very small, and they put a big inverter on it, say a 3000 watt inverter, and the amperage of that cabling, it might only be 15 amps. So you're basically going to destroy the cabling at the very least, or the inverter or appliance or so on. That's not the car's fault. It's not the appliance's fault. It's the user's fault. If you don't read the instructions, okay, and understand what the maximum that will supply is, it's actually the user's fault. Don't ring up Toyota because you've got a Prado and you plugged in a 1000 watt Ninja or a microwave into a 100 watt inverter in the back. It says 100 watt. It says it in the instructions in the vehicle, do not plug anything over 100 watt. That's the maximum that it can put out. You plug something larger into that, there's a very good chance you'll do some damage to the CPU, and that's the worst case scenario. Most likely is you'll just destroy the inverter and maybe burn out a bit of cabling. But again, it's up to the user to read the instructions, okay? It's not something that they can cover every single scenario that's possibly out there. So when we talk about charging the Nomad, some things that you shouldn't do, do not connect it directly from an alternator to the Nomad. I know that you might get some instruction from an electrician that tells you one way of doing things and another. The fact is they didn't build the unit and it's designed the way we designed it, and if you've got a question, you come to us. Don't get third or fourth hand information from somewhere else. The top electricians always ring us when they're doing installations and will ask us certain questions, because if they're not sure, the only dumb question is the one you don't ask. Simply they'll ring us, give us a call, and this is what they want to do, and we'll say yes you can do it or no you can't, never have a problem. If they decide they're going to earth out, say, a DC-DC, going to earth it or cut into existing wiring and run dirty cabling and so on, that's out of our control, and that's typically where you run into issues. Likewise, when you're running things like DCs, charging, which is the preferred way to charge the Nomad from the vehicle, you know, we have wiring diagrams in the kits for a reason, and we like to run clean wiring right through. What you'll find is a lot of people will be using AC cabling, and it'll be cutting into DC. So they're talking about resistance issues and all the rest of that sort of thing, which we don't want to get into. So we always say, look, run a clean run, and avoid just direct to the chassis, because they get funky connections and things like that. The other thing that's very important about the Nomad when you're charging it, and I wanted to point out, and this is very common now because so many out in the market, and when people are out in a caravan park, it's quite typical for them to be running a 240 cable to the car and then plugging in the AC/DC to charge the Nomad, and also be running a double adapter like this. Okay, double adapters like this are banned from building sites, they're banned from aged care, and the reason being is, like, for example, this is a 10 amp. So you could run all sorts of things off this, and people like most that see this will think, well, great, I can run anything off it. So they run it out to the vehicle. This doesn't have any surge protection on it. They plug in two cables, one for the Nomad, one to run the fridge. They might actually run another one off it. The fact is that what's coming out of the house, or what's coming out of the power from the power company, get a surge through, and then what can happen to these is that they ultimately are a fire risk. So you'd never put one of these in a vehicle. Same with the power board and those types, do not run them in there. That's why the portability is there to take it out. Again, like they say on any charging, you don't charge batteries that are unintended. Okay, so you take this out, and typically what you do is put it in a ventilated area, which you'd normally do with any battery. So it's just common sense. If you want to put everything at risk, then maybe run 3 or 4 of them in the vehicle, maybe run a power board, 2 leads into the vehicle, you've got all this current running in, no surge protection. Whose fault is it? It's the user's fault. You need to take some responsibility for what you do, and a little bit of common sense when it comes to charging things and running power, especially when you're running out of caravan parks and you're getting fluctuating and you're getting dirty current, and you've got no surge protection at all going into a vehicle, and you don't really know what's going to be the outcome of that. But we do know that if you put these in anywhere, these are excessive risk, and don't use them at all. The other thing is, if you're running a charge from the vehicle, like from alternator directly to Nomad, you can't do that. Although the electrician might say it's regulated. The fact is, it's not as far as we're concerned, because it's going to be pitches and troughs from the current and the voltage from the alternator. As you know, an alternator can put over 50, 60 amp. We've shown that in our YouTubes before, and this will take a maximum of 25 amp. They might say, well, what if it only goes up to 25 amp and not over? It's still not regulated. You need to have a DC-DC in between, so a voltage stabilizer, which simply takes out any issue, stabilizes that current for the Nomad. By all means, if you connected it, for an example, if you connected it to a Cigar socket and you connected it to the red and black poles, you'll say, well, that's unregulated, can't you do that, and this will take care of it. Now, that's a common mistake people make. They'll say, oh, the regulator regulates anything. If that was the case, you could plug the 240 and then connect to the red and black and it'll regulate it. Absolutely not. It's very clear in the instructions. It's what you do not do. Do not connect directly to a Cigar socket and directly to the Nomad. Even if you fuse this, what people will do, and this is always the issue with fuses, the first thing a person will do when a fuse blows, and it blows a second time, they won't question what they're doing. They'll just look at the fuse and say, I'll put a bigger fuse in. Very, very common in vehicles. Most people with their cars have a blown fuse. They put a bit of foil in there, which was the old school thing. A bit of foil in there. So it's gone from a 10 amp to like a 100 amp fuse. And then they wonder why they burn the wiring out. So fuses are there for a reason, and don't change them. So all of our DCs, our Cigar DCs, all have fusing in there, and they all have instructions as to how to connect. So if you direct connect it to a Cigar socket in the vehicle, we've seen this before, we've got a Cigar socket, and someone's put a Cigar plug like this into the vehicle, and then also put a Cigar plug on this end and try to charge a Nomad. So you've got a charge coming out, a charge coming out. don't do it. It doesn't say not to do that in instructions, but because it doesn't say not to do it, doesn't mean just make stuff up. So if you follow the instructions, it's pretty clear what you can do and what you can't do. Outputs are outputs, inputs are inputs. You've got to take some responsibility for how you charge the units. The other thing is that we have seen is where people have taken, say, a direct feed like so, red and black, to the battery, and then sort of, I've got an Anderson here, this is off a solar panel, connect it to the battery, and then connect direct to the Nomad, and they think that's okay. Again, where's the fuse? There's no fuse in there. You don't do it. Again, when you go back to the instructions, it's clear how you charge the Nomad. It's not a matter of a roundabout or it's an approximation. The ratings are there for a specific reason. They're not there for just to give you a boundary of approximation. It's exact, and it's the max or less and not over. These you've seen, which the power analyzer, are a very good tool to have, and that lets you to understand your off-gridding solution a bit better, to understand the draws, understand what's coming out of the solar panel, and you can also put these between, say, any power source to see what's coming through and hitting the Nomad, just to make sure that you're doing the right thing. But once again, the most important thing is read the instructions. It'll tell you what's the best way to charge a Nomad. What are the 3 or 4 ways to charge a Nomad? The instructions are on the website as well, under V5 instructions. All the DC instructions are on the website that you can look at. If you're not sure about the connections, you can always send us an email. However, each one of our products has the instructions included. And the other thing that I will mention is you've got SIGA DCs that are out there in the market, 5s and 10s. So they're fused correctly. They've got a high C rating of the actual plug. And we've mentioned this before in other tutorials. Just don't assume that you can just cut this plug off and put another one of these on and then fuse it with whatever you like and think that's okay. The plastic also has a rating. If the plastic is only rated for 3 amp, you put a 10 or 15 or 20 amp fuse, and what do you think is going to happen to the plastic? And that's quite a common thing. You'll see it with some of those 12-volt ovens and things like that, where people have cut the plug off and put their own on, and it hasn't been quite rated correctly, and that will cause some issues. So at the moment, you've got your 5 amps, you've got your 10 amp, you've also got 20 amp DC-DC options. They are the only way you should be charging these units from a vehicle. If you're unsure, give us an email. Do not take that information from an electrician, auto electrician or not, doesn't matter. The fact is they haven't built the unit and they don't know what's specific to the unit, and they may be more specific to more AGM, lead acid or gel. But once again, when we're talking about charging the unit, use your common sense. Especially when you're out in caravan parks, don't run multiple extension leads, don't run double adapters, etc. They generally come with warnings anyway, but you just don't run them as a matter of caution. And again, if you follow the instructions, you're not going to have any issues with the product. But if you choose to do your own thing, then obviously it's out of our control. Another thing that I'll bring up is that we'll get people that are taking the Nomad and earthing it to the vehicle or earthing their fridge and bypassing the circuitry. So when the fridge is running, there's actually no load showing on it. Now, for us to troubleshoot that, it's very difficult because our standard question will be, what is it connected and so on. And if you tell us just the fridge connected and you don't tell us actually how you've wired it, because now you've gone outside the realm of what the product was built for, and you're making up your own wiring solution. So we're not going to really understand what's happening. The unit can still work, but it bypasses the circuitry, and you're not going to get a load reading on there. The reason I point that out is that people are getting a little bit more, I guess, adventurous, pulling the back of the unit off and deciding they'll go into the back and start to reconfigure wiring in the back. Again, you're avoiding warranty by doing that because you don't really know what is built in there as far as the computer and all the rest of that goes. So again, any questions about what you want to do or how to apply this to another solution, send us an email. We're more than happy to help you out with a solution to get the most out of it. A lot of times we might suggest don't go with a Nomad, we might suggest just go with a battery and a full BMS solution outside of the Nomad. We'd rather you have the solution that fits what you need rather than just take this and try to make it up to fit what you want to do. It's not built for that, it's just built for portability, simplicity of use, and again, if you follow the instructions, you're never going to have a problem with it. So again, the 3 or 4 pages that are in there are very, very important, and with any accessory, learn what the draw is or learn what the wattage or the accessory ranges that they work, so Dremels and drills. Don't go plugging 1,000 watt microwaves into a 100 watt inverter. Understand that the max inverter that you're going to run out of one of these is probably the 150 here. You can run a 300 watt inverter out of the 20 amp Anderson, but don't be plugging a 1,000 watt inverter thinking you can run a coffee machine or a microwave off this. You've got a 20 amp max output from this at any given time. 10 amp from each one of these sticker sockets. And again, follow the charging instructions, use your common sense, and they're not going to have an issue. Thanks again, and we will talk again soon.